Welcome to Saving America. This special edition we have in the news update on the Georgia law that protects the integrity of the vote. And there's been a lot of negative publicity about it, and we're going to get into the real true facts about this important and protective law of the American democracy. Then we have the rumors, and the rumor is that Biden and his buddies think that raising the corporate tax rate will somehow raise a lot of money and improve the economy. Pretty silly. And in our Just the Facts segment, we have energy expert and faculty at the University of St. Thomas, Mayra Addison, joining us to talk about the current energy situation and the outlook.
That's your final answer?
So let's get down to facts here. In the news, we've had a lot of unbelievable publicity about a new law that was passed in Georgia. The correct name of the law is the Election Integrity Act of 2021, and it's designed to protect the integrity of the vote. I regard voting as one of the most sacred rights of American citizenship, and I think it's very important that we respect that right and we do everything we can to avoid the chaos and the disgrace that were the most recent election and runoff. And so to me, this is extremely important. And I think for all well-educated Americans who are up on their facts, they would support this law if they ever get to see the true story. And that's what we're going to try and share with you today. And so, first of all, we've got the Lion Joe Biden talking about the fact that people can't get water while they're voting. Well, first of all, I've never stood in a voting line long enough to have needed a drink of water, but the law just restricts hacks and partisanship, like people running around with MAGA hats and people running around with T-shirts supporting their favorite candidate, from running around a voting line and handing out water and other goodies. It doesn't say you can't have water. In fact, it specifically says that water that is freely available, where people can step out of line and get water and get back in line, that is completely okay. So Joe's lying, as he often does. Personal opinion is that Joe Biden is suffering from something that many voters suffered from in November: Trump derangement syndrome. And old Joe has certainly had his issues, but he seems content to simply wipe out every good thing that Trump did for Americans. And this is no exception, even though it's not at the federal level, at least at the moment. And one of the things I thought was interesting is that the impact of the voter integrity law in Georgia is bipartisan. It doesn't put either party at a disadvantage. And I think that's an important consideration. I've reviewed this thing very carefully, and I'm not seeing anything that's like, gee, if I was somebody else and if I lived in Georgia, would this make me feel that it is pushing me towards one party or the other? And if anything, it made me support the Republicans simply because it's a good law and it's not racist. I find it fascinating that the party that enforced 100 years roughly of discrimination against Black Americans, the party that enforced Jim Crow, the party that kept the American military segregated until after World War II, is claiming to understand what racism is about and what might be racist and what isn't racist. And I assure you that this law is anything but racist. And in fact, there's some statistics that support what I'm saying. And one of the things that they looked at was they conducted a poll for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, a major newspaper, and they found that 74% of Georgians support photo ID requirement for voting. Of that, 63% of Black respondents supported voter ID. And the racist concept that because someone is a person of color, that they do not have ID is racism in its extreme sense. And in fact, I would say that the Democrats are practicing their own version of Jim Crow, the new version, which is talking their cronies in the press into backing them up on some of this nonsense. The voter hours are the same. An additional Saturday has been added. There are some additional restrictions for each absentee ballot. People need to request those in advance. Military, those who live overseas, people with disabilities will still be able to request an absentee ballot for an entire election cycle. Now, those who are requesting an absentee ballot for some miscellaneous reason, instead of being able to go in 180 days in advance, will now be able to go in 11 weeks in advance. To me, this is how do people know 180 days in advance that they're going to be unavailable on election day, who do not fall into the prior categories that are already protected? Yeah, this is nonsense. It's time for people to stop listening to this nonsense and to say, enough, enough. But of course, we've got the chicken CEOs of companies headquartered in Georgia, like Coca-Cola and Delta Airlines, who are shaking in their boots because some idiot has said, gee, that might be racist. You shouldn't support such things in your state. Well, I'm telling you that I think those particular businesses are going to take a much bigger hit if they don't get their heads out of their respective butts and start respecting the law and try reading the law before being bullied by these racist and irrational arguments that are being made. So that's our look at the Georgia election law. And yes, I support virtually all of it, as it is important that we protect the integrity of the American vote.
Well, the week is thick. Goodbye.
Rumor this week is a little bit different. We've got Joe Biden out there telling us that by raising the corporate tax rate from the fairly recent rate of 21% to 28% is somehow going to generate a whole bunch of revenue, but it's not going to slow down the economy. Now let's step back. The economy had its worst recovery, in fact, virtually a non-recovery during the Obama-Biden administration. And from 2008 to 2016. And that's a statistical fact. There's no political aspect to that. The numbers are the numbers. It was the worst recovery in American history. And what did they do? They didn't do much. They passed a stimulus bill that was supposedly going to help infrastructure. Gee, where did that $800 billion go? Yeah, down the toilet. And they're out there trying to raise money for 1.8 trillion or 3 trillion or how many other trillions they've got. And it's supposedly going to be another infrastructure bill. And what Biden is saying is that he's going to throw in this tax increase to somehow mitigate the damage that he will do to the American economy by putting this, what I call the Pig Farm 2 bill. Recall that I referred to the most recent stimulus bill as having so much pork in it. It's not just a porky bill, it's the whole pig farm. And this current proposed stimulus 2, you might call it, or Biden stimulus 2, is Pig Farm 2, as it is not designed in any realistic fashion. In fact, the statistics I've heard is less than 25% of this bill would actually go to infrastructure. And in the meantime, let's take a look at that tax increase. The American economy took off after, in late 2017, Trump pushed through his Tax Reform Act, and it lowered the corporate tax rate down to 21%. Now, note that Trump had pushed to bring it down lower than that, and the 21% was a compromise. Now, what happened is hundreds of billions of dollars that corporations had parked overseas came back into the United States. This was a significant development and definitely helped trigger the best economic recovery on record, certainly since World War II. And all we needed to do is to say, bring your money home. We're going to tax you about the same rate that you would be taxed if you kept it overseas. Gee, what a unique concept that we are competitive with other countries in the world. And I think that's a very important aspect. And so what we've got is Biden suffering from Trump derangement syndrome, uh, Trump derangement syndrome, and Biden is trying to undo every conceivable thing that Trump has done to help the American economy. And it's very unfortunate because I think that this indeed would be a major blow to a struggling economy as we come out of the pandemic. And I think if the Republicans will stand up, make court challenges, do everything they can to slow these things down that have such a negative effect, that we might get out of the pandemic and get people back to work.
Just the facts, ma'am.
Welcome to our third segment in Saving America, and we have a return guest. We have Mayra Addison, who has a fascinating background, as we've indicated, and she's going to talk with us today about energy and the United States, and this is her area of special expertise, and she's going to start by telling us a little bit about what she's been up to with regard to energy in the United States.
Thank you, David. Yes, I am a member of a group called Global Energy Mentors. We are under the umbrella of the University of St. Thomas, who is hosting us. Global Energy mentors startup companies from incubation from a very early stage, from incubation through acceleration only. We don't provide funding, but we get you ready for funding. And we just had our first success. We've been together since 2018, the end of 2018, and we had our first mentee graduate and get Series A funding. It was acquired by another company. It was the company is called Troposphere, and it was the woman who started it is a woman scientist. So in the month of the women, we should congratulate her especially. So, and we mentor everything in energy. It can be anything that is related to the energy industry. We have mentees that purify water that come out of an oil well, and we have mentees who are designing an algorithm on the cloud to optimize the design of microgrids. So it's the whole spectrum.
Excellent, excellent. Well, that's wonderful. Well, you have the right background to talk a little bit about the Biden energy policy, and of course, you're very aware of some of the big changes that have taken place with the Keystone Pipeline being yo-yoed back and forth between the Obama, Trump, and Biden administrations, and also the impact on gasoline prices. So tell us a little bit about that.
The Biden administration and the Obama administration have declared a war on hydrocarbons. It's part of a world movement to demonize hydrocarbons because they they call CO2 equivalents. It's not just CO2 that comes from a combustion, but all CO2 equivalents that come from, for example, coal or other emissions, even hexafluorocarbons too. that are being used in the wind industry, for example. But we have simplified the problem to hydrocarbons come from the oil, and therefore the oil is bad. I keep telling my students when I teach a class in energy, and as part of the class, they have to pick a developing country, and they develop the electricity system for that country. I keep telling my students to use common sense and to first, before they say what kind of sources they're going to use for that country, to look at the indigenous resources for that country. That's common sense. That is sustainable. Renewable doesn't mean sustainable. Renewable is just that, renewable. We're not using anything that we're extracting from the subsoil and not putting it back. So renewable is hydro, renewable is geothermal, renewable is marine waves, renewable is wind, and renewable is solar too. So, but that doesn't mean that it's sustainable for a country. What is sustainable for a country is to use their indigenous resources. In the United States, we have plenty of gas and oil. Gas is one of the cleanest way to generate in a thermal way other than nuclear. When we declare the war on what is indigenous to us, we are getting in a whole lot of trouble. I don't need to explain that closing down the gas pipeline, the XL pipeline, is a mistake. We can see what happened with Obama. We saw what happened with Trump when he opened up the construction of the pipeline. And we're seeing what's happening when Biden closed the construction of the pipeline. We are becoming less dependent, less independent in energy. The oil prices are going up, which means that countries that have dictatorships like Venezuela are cheering for that at this point, because they could not compete with their oil prices so low, their economies that were so dependent on oil, although these tyrants around the world are now are saying, thank you, Mr. Biden, that the price of oil is going up. So then we think that we're saving the environment by closing the XL pipeline. Well, that gas and that oil needs to be transported. And now that we cannot transport it in the pipeline, now we need trucks and railroads to transport it, creating a higher carbon footprint for the transportation of that oil, which is clearly not sustainable, and clearly not good to the environment, and clearly not good for jobs in America, and clearly not good for a geopolitical position of the United States, because now countries like Venezuela are going to become stronger thanks to Biden policy.
Yeah, this is a pretty fascinating, geopolitical situation, I think they call it. And you're giving a gift to people who are not American taxpayers. And the false narrative of the Democratic Party has often been, oh, we're the party of the poor and minorities. And yet, you and I, being in the middle class, basically, I mean, it's fun to pay $1.75 for gasoline, but it's $2.75 roughly on the United States market today. And that is not going to keep us from making a mortgage payment or a rent payment. But there are many, many people who supposedly are being supported by the Democratic Party or supporting the party, who $1 a gallon change in a gallon of gasoline makes an enormous difference. Not everybody can take public transportation to work, and public transportation is not free, and the cost of those transportation vehicles is based on the cost also. So what have we seen with that? Do you see any turnaround?
You were talking about inflation. transporting goods at a higher price causes inflation. I mean, transporting a gallon of milk now is going to be more expensive. And like you said, the ones that are going to be affected is the poorest and our children, because our children will end up paying for this inflation. Just going outside the United States, these implications that Biden is, the policies from Biden have implications all over the world. It's not just in the United States. Our country has a GDP high enough that can buffer the increase in gasoline for the economy of a family. Other countries are highly dependent on oil for their energy sources. And those are developing countries where the GDP cannot buffer that. And those are countries that are highly dependent not on a service economy, but an agribusiness economy that needs the oil to transport their goods outside the agribusiness. So the poorest of the poorest are going to be suffering from an increase in oil prices all over the world. We still need oil to develop. We still need oil for the poor. Solar panels and windmills are really nice, but they don't solve the problem. They are intermittent. They can only provide no more than 20% of the energy, and they have a lot of side effects. They are not carbon neutral. They are highly pollutant because they are an intermittent source. We have seen a high increase in equipment that buffers the intermittence, and that equipment works with hexafluorocarbons. We have seen a huge increase of hexafluorocarbons in the atmosphere. 1 ton of hexafluorocarbons is like 25,000 tons of CO2 in the Kyoto equivalent. So we have to be careful what we use. It's okay for Europe to use wind because they don't have gas. They have to import it from Russia. It's okay for China to have windmills because they don't have oil, but they use coal, which is 10 times more polluting than gas. So we have gas. We can have cheap energy for our industries. We can have cheap energy for our households. Why not? Why not make that our source while we have it and it's sustainable?
Well, I really appreciate your comments today, and it's been delightful to have you back on Saving America, and I hope you'll consider coming back again. And this has been Mayra Addison, and she has a great background, as you heard, and we're so happy to have her back on Saving America.